Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Benson. I am an intentionally intimate relationship coach. And today I have a lovely guest named Briana MacWilliam. And we are going to be talking about really the difficult decision of do I stay or do I go? And really diving deep into the decision-making process around relationships. Briana, I'm going to go ahead and have you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about kind of the work you do.
Sure. Well, my name is Briana MacWilliam, and I am an author, educator, and licensed creative arts therapist. I've been in the field for about 13 years now, and I am just wild about helping adults in their romantic relationships go from feeling insecure or kind of lost and fearful to calling in the soul-shaking partnerships that they want. And ideally without having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And I do this with a psychospiritual approach to creative arts interventions through the framework of attachment theory.
Perfect. And so we'll be talking a lot about attachment theory today. I'll be bringing my lens with couples work and the research behind couples. And so we really wanted to start to talk about this really difficult decision. I mean, sometimes in relationships, you get a clear cutoff that this relationship isn't going to work and this partner isn't a good fit for you. That, and Briana, please correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like that's not the norm. That doesn't always happen for a lot of us. And we struggle with being with a partner who we're kind of like, this isn't a great relationship. We're kind of struggling a little bit, but we're kind of weighing the pros and cons. Do we stay in this relationship? Should I leave this relationship? And our hope today is kind of to help uncover that process and the difficulty of it. And get you connected with your internal self and how to navigate that. And so, Briana, maybe you could talk just for a moment on, maybe give us an example or kind of why, one reason why this is such a difficult decision, kind of when someone's stuck in that gray area between, I don't know if I should be all the way in or if I should get all the way out.
Well, it's very tied up in what we value, why we value it, what we prioritize, why we prioritize it, and also our sense of self and how much is our sense of self caught up in those things. So, for example, oftentimes I get the question, I get this a lot actually from married couples who have kids that are thinking about getting divorced, or one partner will contact me saying that divorce is sort of on the table, but they are resisting it because they're, what about the kids kind of thing, or I'm going to lose a lot of money, or it might require a big change in my life in some fashion, and I'm afraid it's going to ruin my kids' lives, or that, you know, my family will hate me forever, or I'm going to lose a lot of money as a result of it. And so that kind of puts you in a position. So what's sort of being demonstrated there is that there is a valuing and a prioritizing of everything outside of you above whatever it is that's going on inside of you. And this is not to say that you shouldn't care about what happens to your kids, you know, and the impact that that will have on them. But to some extent, you know, it's also realizing that remaining in a loveless marriage is not necessarily good parenting either. You know, like, what is it that you are modeling for your children to experience down the road? Would you want for your child to have the marriage that you are having now? And so, you know, children don't follow what you say, they follow what you do. And so that's just a very specific example I'm offering. But basically, we have tied up in those ideas about the loss of something when we are feeling like this may not be for me anymore. We have a lot of fears around external losses, and that we may have to experience a redefinition of self in context, in our contexts in general. And so at the basis of that, if we are feeling a sense of contrast or conflict around it, it's because there's some aspect of you is wanting something from that change in your circumstance. And it may not, this is the thing, you may not need to change your circumstance per se to get that thing. It's just approaching it from a different angle, like the work that you do with, Gottman, and examining the four horsemen and looking at how you're talking to each other. Maybe changing your communication styles is actually going to allow you to elicit that thing from the relationship you already have. It's just that you don't have the tools or the skills yet, so that you're able to shift what's actually going on in your present circumstance, right? And so sometimes it may require doing what you're already doing, just doing it better. And then once you've realized, yeah, I am doing this the best that I can do, and it's still, I'm feeling this contrast and this conflict, then that's a different question. And that's more of an inward journey where you're looking at, am I in this now because I have a fear that by the end of it, I won't be okay, really? Or that I'm not okay without all these things? Is that really a fear-based place from which I'm operating? And the only way we can know that is if you are able to tune into the self and ask yourself some hard questions about your values, your priorities, what you believe, and what your deepest fears and desires may be. How is that landing?
That's good. So that's a ton. And so I kind of want to slow down and pick these apart a little bit and go into more detail. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing, right, it's very common for couples to go to couples therapy on the verge of divorce or wanting to separate. Actually, the research shows couples tend to wait 6 years before they actually seek help. Personally, that's way too long. I would highly recommend being more preventative than reactive with working with someone or working on your relationship.
I guess that's where the 7-year itch comes from. Is that where that expression comes from?
It's a piece of it, yeah. And I think it's you get stuck in your patterns, right? And that's part of it. And when I'm talking with couples who are kind of like, well, I'm not sure if I want to stay committed to this person. I don't know if this person is for me. And so the Gottman method, you do a deep analysis of the entire relationship, the dynamics in conflict, dynamics outside of conflict, and you get kind of a global picture of what's going on. And kind of what I ask the couples at the end of kind of that assessment is I go, okay, based on all this information that we have about your relationship, what's going well, what's not going well, areas of improvement, and kind of give them a roadmap for how to improve things. I ask them, do you want to divorce each other, or do you want to divorce the patterns you two have created together? Right. And so that's the first thing that would look at is if you have that urge to divorce your partner or you're thinking about divorce, right? One, I want to acknowledge that's a pretty actual normal thing. A lot of people think about breaking up, especially when they're frustrated, when they're upset, or they feel like things are not going well. The key though is to take in that desire, that almost that fantasy of like, oh, if I do this, things would be better, and go, what is the hidden wish within that? And so kind of as Briana pointed out earlier, how do you internalize it and go, what am I needing for things to change? And then taking that and going, what is my role in making that change, right? Do I need to, instead of going to my partner and just telling them they're a slob and they don't ever care for the house, or that they never contribute to date night, right? Maybe I need to go say, hey, look, would you plan a date night for us? Mm-hmm. Or, hey, let's sit down and let's talk about how we divvy up the chores, because I could really use your support, right? How you talk about things influences how a conversation goes. And so that's the first thing, is to look at what's the longing within that. And what's interesting is a lot of couples who come to the Love Lab, they're like, we're here because we're deciding whether to divorce or stay together. And they kind of leave either with this sense of, yeah, we're going to work on it, we're going to be fully committed to this. Or sometimes, and this is pretty rare, but sometimes partners get to an agreement where they're like, you know what? We care about each other. We can be friends. We can be close, but we're very different people. And our values, our belief systems are so different that it's going to cause a lot of perpetual problems throughout our relationship. And what a more mature decision might be is actually to explore how to be co-parents, how to work together and navigate these so we can be happy with other people too. And so I think that goes back to that attachment, egoic attachment that you highlighted. And so to break this down again, it's exploring the patterns that happen in the relationship, especially your part, creating space for your partner willing to show up and change the patterns in the relationship, taking ownership of your role, and then exploring the fear. If it comes to a point where you're like, you know what, I've done a lot for this relationship and it's still not working, and you're scared about leaving, even though the relationship isn't working and it's really unhealthy, I think that's where I'm going to kind of put this over to you, Briana, where I think your brilliance really comes in of understanding this fear, understanding what's going on for it and how to navigate it. And so I'm actually going to have kind of push it over to you to talk a little bit about the fears we have when leaving a relationship or divorcing, and how sometimes that can keep us stuck. And sometimes how that can also free us too. So I'll let you kind of just take it over from there.
Well, so sometimes I think it has to do with that relationship with the inner and the outer. So I can share the questions that we had talked about before, maybe as a way of going a little bit deeper with it. So if we are fearful of ending a relationship, in this case, divorce, and that, let's assume there's a little bit more involved because there's a legal document between you. Maybe your finances are blended, perhaps you've got kids, you have owned property together, there's other investments, so forth and so on. So it is kind of a more weighted decision in that it's not just that you're ending a love relationship, it's also that the foundational structures of your life may need to be extricated and reformed, basically. So that is a very deep kind of uprooting. And of course, it's not a decision to be taken lightly. But if it's something that you're struggling with and you're not sure, is this something that I'm struggling with because I'm too concerned about what other people are going to think about me, or because my values and my beliefs are too tied up in the external circumstances of things? Or is it because it really is an expression of my inner being and who I am? And it's not that I hate this person. It's just that we're not necessarily, for each of our growth processes, we need to change the living circumstances that we have, right? So, for example, my ex-husband and I are co-parents, and once we got divorced and lived in separate houses, we actually became a lot closer. And so I still consider my ex to be one of my most successful long-term relationships. He's just not my lover. He's the father of my child, and I consider him to be a close family member. But that's the nature of our relationship contract changed. It's not a legal contract per se anymore, but our relational contract actually became a lot stronger in a new context. And so one of the things, these are just a couple of questions that you might ask yourself if you want to go down that rabbit hole to decide, what is the deepest desire fueling over which I am sort of lumping this fear, because I don't think that I'm going to be okay in the end of it, right? So you might start by thinking, what do I want people to think of me as? So what is it that you are what are you concerned about other people thinking about you? How do you want people to perceive you, first of all? Secondly, I don't want people to think of me as. So what are you concerned about? How do you not want to be perceived? Like, what is the worst thing that you could think people think about you, right? And then to think about when you feel vulnerable, or you feel threatened, or you feel like you are at a disadvantage, how do you tend to respond in situations like that, right? What is your pattern? Do you step in and try to dominate, or do you withdraw, right?
And I want to add one little piece on that, right? Mm-hmm. When thinking about those previous questions, how do I want people to think of me? How do I want people not to think of me, right? We're looking at identity, right? Mm-hmm. Who are you? How do you define yourself? How do you see yourself? And sometimes you might feel threatened when your identity comes in. And so if you consider yourself to be a romantic or successful lover, and your relationship is alien, and you're kind of figuring out whether to let go of a relationship, you're going to have a reaction to exiting that relationship. And almost your identity is going to potentially pull you into staying in the relationship. It's interesting. There's coaches, there's therapists who work with couples or work on relationships, and they run up against this barrier where they're like, well, because I help these other people do this other stuff, I also must be in a relationship, or I must prove that I am this way. Um, but that can lead to getting stuck in unhealthy relationships or staying because you're trying to not be perceived by other people as unsuccessful in relationships, which ironically for me is actually that you are unsuccessful in a relationship because you are staying in one or tolerating like really unhealthy behaviors because you are clinging to your identity.
And qualifying experience based on a legal document, you know. I think it's a great point to bring up because it's often like, how are we defining success?
Right.
How are you defining a successful relationship or even a successful marriage? What's your definition of that?
Mm-hmm. And what is that? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I mean, you're probably going to say the same thing.
Yeah, well, and what does that look like, right? Because you can go out in the world and we can say, oh, there's all these relationships are normal like this. And there's actually a book called The Normal Bar where they say these are the normals. But like reality, like what's normal for you? What's going to work for you and your partner, right? There are couples who want to go travel the world all the time and that works for them. There's other couples who want more time just reading separately. One person goes to a beach cabin, another person goes to a mountain cabin, and they have a wonderful relationship. Or like even sex. Like sometimes couples want to have it like all the time, and other couples like, you know what, once a month is great. And it's defining what works for you. And that's where I think mature values are shaped, right? And this is, I think, part of the exercise that Briana's kind of taking through and asking these questions is it helps us get clarity on the values we have, start to question them, and actually start to sculpt them in a way that empowers our relationships to be the very type of relationship that we want, to be the mature relationship where we get to be authentically ourselves, they get to be authentically themselves, and we work together to mold this thing into something that's really beautiful. But that is also hard. And so I kind of want to stop talking and give it back to you to talk about this vulnerable part when it feels threatened or when it like, what are some of the things that come up?
Well, so for example, when I feel vulnerable or threatened, I tend to respond by. So a sense of vulnerability or threat will probably be stimulated by some threat to your value system or some threat of something that you prioritize that you love being taken away. And that could be a thing, you know, it could be money, it could be property, it could be your kids, it could be, but it could also be, like you said, an identity marker. You know, someone else in my group recently said that I had said something to the effect of when you anxiety is avoiding your own expansion. Or is resisting your expansion. And she's like, well, what happens when someone is causing you real harm? And I asked about that more deeply. And she had expressed that she was with a husband who had been emotionally kind of abusive and seemed to fit a narcissistic paradigm and would gaslight her and cheat on her and steal her money. And now he wanted a divorce and she was fighting the divorce because she didn't want to give him the money that he wanted, and she didn't want to lose her status, and she didn't want to do this, and she didn't want to do that. So to my mind, it's like, so the issue there, in my perspective, the universe is giving you a giant escape route. Like, first of all, why didn't she try to leave this guy a long time ago? Secondly, now that the opportunity is there, she's fighting it. And why? Because like, did all of that money make you happy? Are you not willing to buy your freedom here? Don't you think that your freedom is worth it? And so the issue becomes, she's not valuing what's valuable about herself. She's valuing all these other things. And she's thinking, once I lose all these other things, even him, she wanted to keep him because he was a status symbol, because it meant she was married, right? But the idea, the universe is, in my opinion, trying to strip her of all the things that she values, that she prioritizes, that she thinks is what's good and right about her, so that she can see what is actually valuable, good, and right about her, which is none of those things. And so if she can find that tremendous opportunity that is being offered to her, then she has a chance to step into her own power. And I 100% believe that these things happen when you're ready for them. So if she's in a position to where she's making a ton of money and now she's afraid of losing it with this guy, it's because whatever coping skills and strengths she had to get her this far, to make that much money, to be that fiscally responsible, means that she's also strong enough now to have it all taken away and rebuild it from a place of real value and self-worth, so that she can call in a partner who can share in that with her and not usurp her vitality and life force, right? But she has to believe that for herself, and she must not. Otherwise, she would have let it happen. So that's kind of why I'm asking these kinds of questions, because it becomes that relationship between outer and inner. So I want people to think of me in this way. I don't want them to think of me in this way. That's your persona. That's the mask you're wearing. Okay. And that's where we put a lot of time, energy, and effort into producing that. So then when you feel vulnerable and or threatened, that becomes your inner experience. And that's when the mask sort of automatically gets thrown up, right? But okay, so now we're removing the mask and we're going in. When you feel vulnerable and threatened, how do you respond? In this woman's circumstance, she clung tighter, right? She was clinging tighter. There's an overemphasis on clinging to what I'm going to call what she was egoically attached to, what she was falsely valuing and prioritizing, okay? So, and how has that served her? She wouldn't do it if it didn't serve her in some way. So she must be getting served in some fashion. Status, aplomb, people like her. She has a sense of belonging. She feels superior to other people. Maybe it flies in the face of a negative childhood where maybe she was poor and didn't have a lot of money. So those things are serving her in some way. So the next question would be, but sometimes it creates bigger problems what's the bigger problem? She's in a relationship with a usurping narcissist, right? And she's not valuing what is really valuable about her. So she's miserable and she's in a victimized place, right? So if I didn't respond this way, I'm afraid that. So if she let it all go, if she bought her freedom, if she just said, you know what, none of these things define me, and I am so much bigger than any of these things could possibly ever contain of what is me, and I'm going to go start living a whole new life and have a whole new identity that doesn't require that I live in a victimized place. If she's afraid that if she were to do that, then the underlying fear is that she's not valuable. There's nothing valuable about her. Nobody else would love her. She'll be lost and destitute and living on the street. Like, that is the fear, right? So then you have to ask, okay, well, to get over that fear, what would you need to believe? Well, she would need to believe that she had the supports in place, that wouldn't happen. She would need to believe that she has enough skills, capacities, smarts, and experience under her belt to put the things in place so that couldn't happen to her. And she would also have to believe that she is valuable. She is good enough. She is lovable. Somebody will be there for her, whether it's a lover, whether it's a friend or a support person or something, right? And so then that must mean that what she really wants, if that's what she would need to believe, what does she really want? She wants to be free. She wants to be who she really is. She wants to feel her own value. She wants to step into her power. She wants to know that all of those things are in place. I know and desire to live a free life where relationships are not about bondage. They are about abundance, and they are about collaboration, and they are about love and reciprocity, and they are about building something bigger than we each are separately. And knowing that whatever happens, I will be okay. And I am of value just by virtue of the fact that I exist. So I'm going to bounce it over to you, Kyle.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that. You're asking people to do deep inner work about who they are. You're asking them to intentionally slow down and examine their belief system, their values, to call them into question and figure out whether they're helpful or unhelpful. Because a lot of times culture will place these value markers on us that we internalize as our identity, and we try to maintain those, even if they are not helpful for us. Mm-hmm. And so and again, this stuff is difficult, right? Right. We can say like a 42-year-old man is an adult, but emotionally, he might not have done this hard work to be an emotionally mature adult,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because in my view, maturity is getting attuned to your core, who you are, what you believe in, how you want to show up in the world, and really intentionally sculpting the values and beliefs that you want to have, and deciding to live from that place rather than letting other people dictate how you should be or who you should be. And part of this exploration that Briana's inviting you into is to explore that. And I want to say that's hard work. And I think this goes back to our initial question of, do I stay or do I go? Mm-hmm. Right? You now, right, you have evidence in terms of testing or not testing, experimenting in the relationship and trying to change the patterns, taking ownership of your own role, exploring internally what's going on for you. And then you're kind of sitting in this, what do I do now? And so let's say things have not worked out. Let's say your partner is not willing to work on things. They keep distancing. You've given them space. You've done all these other things to try to get them to engage in relationship with you. And they don't. What do you do? And I think, go ahead.
I was going to say, part of it is training yourself to always reframe the narrative, and so that you see the opportunity in every situation. So for example, and I know we have to end soon, so I won't get too deep into it. But so for example, one thing that I do to reframe is I have accepted the premise that everything in my life is for my greatest good. And there is no such thing as a wrong decision. And there's no such thing as a mistake. I used to feel when I was younger that when a relationship ended, that my life had gone horribly wrong and I had somehow thrown my life off track. And now I was just going to live this life. I wasn't going to live the life I wasn't living the life I was meant to live. And I had to shed that. And by doing that, I just accepted the premise that everything in my life is for my greatest good. And there's no wrong answer. There's no one right path. And thus there is no wrong path. So if any situation you find yourself in, if you ask yourself, what story would I have to write in order for this to be the most beneficial thing for me to be happening right now? So if you're in that situation, I don't know, do I stay or do I go? You would say, okay, if this is the best thing that could be happening to me right now, what else would have to be true? Well, so maybe the ambiguity that I feel right now is intended to create an opportunity for me to look at something I haven't looked at in a long time. And maybe by looking at that thing, I am going to be able to know myself that much better. And maybe by knowing myself that much better, I'm going to be able to expand even wider into my circumference. And maybe by expanding even wider into my circumference, I'm going to be much more confident in myself and my abilities. Maybe that's going to open me up to becoming more empathic towards other people. And maybe if I'm feeling more empathic, that's going to make me better at my job. And maybe if I become better at my job, then that means that other opportunities are going to open up for me in the world. And maybe if this relationship isn't supposed to be my lifelong relationship, but perhaps leads me towards this expansion of abundance in life, love, and in my finances, I then meet someone who is already expanded thus far and able to take me to new heights of love and attraction. And then maybe the energy that we generate together is going to allow us to build something that isn't just about the energy that is bouncing between us, but rather about building something bigger than ourselves. And we end up building an institution like the Gottman Institute in Seattle, where we get to invite lovers from all over the world to come and we can diagnose their problems and we can help them live happy, expanding, loving lives. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you can see everything like an opportunity, but know that we only live our lives with perspective, like in a pinpoint of time, whereas the universe sees it from a moon's eye view. And if we can for me, it has been a benefit to accept the premise that in this moment, no matter what contrast I'm feeling, if I accept it as for my greatest good, then eventually I will move with less and less resistance because I am not egoically attached to what's going on in my circumstances. Less and less resistance. I'm moving faster, gaining momentum, more energy, moving. Exponentially, I am moving quicker and quicker and quicker, stepping into, as if riding a wave, into that moon's eye view and perspective of what is possible for me. Because I trust and I know that I am worthy of it and that it is always flowing through me.
I love your passion, and it's so and I think this is one of, we are going to have to end here in the next minute, but this is something I really want you to take away, right? We tend to look at the negative. Humans have a negativity bias. But what if you flip the script and started to go, what else is here? What's the possibility for my growth? What's the possibility for this relationship? What's that look like? And one of the things that comes up from blocking, even conceptualizing that possibility, is the fear convincing you that you can only live in this little spectrum. Mm-hmm. But as Briana went all the way to building another Gottman Institute, right? The highlight is when you allow yourself to be creative, and Briana talked about this more in other videos in our series, you are able to step into something different. You're able to engage in love and life in a different way that can change a lot of things. And I think that also makes it easier for you to make the difficult decision of whether to stay or go. And really to honor that. And so there is a lot more Briana and I could talk about this, but for the sake of time, we're gonna time out here. If you have any comments, feel free to just comment in the Facebook comments below. Briana, as we wrap up, I would love for people to know how to contact you, especially if they're interested in this expansion and learning to explore themselves. So I'd love to have you add that in as we wrap up.
Sure. If anyone would like to reach out, my website is brianamacwilliam.com.
Perfect. And I'm Kyle Benson. You can find me at kylebenson.net. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will talk to you another time.
My pleasure. Thank you.